The Siege of Oreja by the forces of Alfonso VII, Emperor of Spain, lasted from April to October 1139, when the Almoravid garrison surrendered. It was the first major victory of the renewed Reconquista that characterized the last 2 decades of Alfonso's reign. The main source for the Siege of Oreja is the contemporary Chronica Adefonsi imperatoris, a narrative of Alfonso's reign in 2 books. According to this source, at the time it was the largest campaign that had been conducted in the combined regions of Toledo and Extremadura. Historian Bernard Reilly has succinctly explained the virtues and vices of the Chronica as a reliable historical account. The second book of the Chronica is made up largely of a series of popular tales originally composed separately and only subsequently tacked together in a literary, Latin text appended to the more traditional and staid annals that form most of its first book. The compiler has often scarcely bothered to reconcile his materials, much less treat them critically. 19 royal charters were issued from Alfonso's camp during the siege, NOS 334-52, and another 2, NOS 353-54, are important for its dating. The dating and chronology of the siege can be most reliably established from an examination of the documents. Background: the town of Oreja, Orelia, with its castle, lay on the Tagus about 50 kilometers, 31 miles, upstream from Toledo. It was of strategic importance for the defense of Toledo. It is today represented by Colmena de Oreja, then the small settlement of Apus Aureliae. In 1113, at the height of the civil war between Queen Urraca, the supporters of her son, the future Alfonso VII, and the supporters of her husband, Alfonso the Battler, while it was being guarded by the Duke of nearby Toledo, Alvar Fane, Oreja fell to the Muslims. According to the Chronica, the King of Seville and the King of Córdoba and all the other Almoravid rulers in the south had gathered a large army of cavalry, infantry, and archers. They proceeded to the territory of Toledo and began to attack the castle at Oreja. They massacred the Christians there and took many prisoners. The soldiers in Oreja were daily moving on the offensive against Toledo and against other cities in the Trans-Sierra region. They committed many massacres and carried away a great deal of booty. By March 1115 it was either back in Christian hands or its Christian population in exile at Toledo had its own alcalde, a certain Geneseo recorded in a private charter at that time. In 1131 there was another Christian-Muslim skirmish, a fierce battle, the Chronica calls it near Oreja, that resulted in Muslim victory. The anonymous author of the Chronica notes that the Muslims stationed at Oreja were a constant menace to the Christians of the Alfaz region, around Toledo. When Alfonso VII realized that the Lord had given him somewhat of a respite from his enemies early in 1139, he took counsel with his advisors and decided to besiege Oreja in April. The commander of the Muslim garrison was Ali, a famous infidel chieftain and notorious murderer of Christians in the Trans-Sierra. According to the Chronica, the defenders included a large number of archers and cavalry, with a somewhat more modest infantry contingent, and consisted in both native Muslims and Almoravid Berbers from northern Africa. The castle was well prepared for an assault, and boasted catapults for hurling large stones. Siege. Initiation. The siege was begun in April by the brothers Gutier and Rodrigo Fernandez, both governors on the frontier, at the orders of Alfonso, each with their own mesnadas, knightly retinues, and with the militias, cavalry and infantry, of Toledo and the other cities of the Trans-Sierra and the Extremadura. The towns of Avila, Guadalajara, Madrid, Salamanca, Segovia, Talavera, and Zamora are known to have had especially active militias on the southern frontier in the period. Probably at least the municipalities of Avila, Salamanca, and Segovia participated. While the Fernandez brothers began the siege, Alfonso gathered all of the military personnel from Galicia, Leon, and Castile, in the words of the Chronica, at a place unnamed, and departed for Oreja with a large number of infantry troops. When the royal army arrived is unknown, and the first evidence of the king's presence is in a charter he issued from the siege on July 25. This charter shows that a large contingent of magnates from Galicia had joined Alfonso at the siege, including Fernando Yanez and his son Pelayo Cavo, Rodrigo Velaz, and, according to documents in the archives of Santa Maria de la Sierra, 4 of the sons of Pedro Froilaz de Truba, Fernando Porres, Garcia Porres, Rodrigo Porres, and Bermudo Porres. Royal charters issued from the siege during the remainder of the summer show that all of these Galicians left Oreja not long after, possibly to defend the frontier with Portugal, but more likely because they resented long campaigns so far from home. Magnates from the more central provinces, like Gutier and Rodrigo Fernandez, Ramiro Froilaz, and Rodrigo Gomez, remained at the siege probably until the end. The regular courtiers were also present throughout the campaign, including Ponce de Cabrera, a mainstay of Alfonso's Reconquista expeditions. There were 7 bishops present. Lope Lopez may also have been present. The Chronica records that Alfonso also brought with him siege engineers and built several siege engines, probably including at least siege towers placed against the walls, for investing the castle. To cut off the defenders' water supplies, he stationed guards along the riverbank and had a mantelet placed at a location where they had theretofore drawn water in secret. One day the Muslims sallied forth and set the mantelet, left unguarded, on fire, destroying it. Thereafter, however, an order prevented anybody inside the castle from leaving. The internal water reserves, the cisterns, had been exhausted, and the effects of hunger began to set in. Many of them died for lack of food and water. It is not clear when during the siege this happened, since the Chronica does not provide a clear chronology of those 7 months. Surrender. The towers of the castle were destroyed by the siege engines, and this, the Chronica indicates, convinced Ali to seek terms after consulting with his advisors. It further records the following messages between the 2 leaders, by which the terms of the surrender were established. Ali, let us come to terms by means of a peace treaty. Grant us a period of 1 month, so that we may again send a messenger across the Mediterranean Sea to King Texafan and to all the Spanish Moslems also on this side of the sea. If no one will come to our aid, we will march out and return your castle to you. You will then allow us to go peacefully, taking all of our belongings to our city of Calatrava. Alfonso, I will make the following agreement with you: give me 15 of your nobles as hostages excepting Ali. If no one will come to your defense, you will return my castle to me. Your catapults and all of your weapons and riches will remain in the castle. You will be allowed to take only your personal possessions with you. The Christian captives in your dungeons will remain in the castle to be fed by my men at my own expense. These terms were accepted. The Muslim hostages were sent to Toledo under guard, and both leaders pledged under oath to fulfill every item in the treaty as stated. The defenders went messengers, but they returned with no hope of a timely rescue. The castle surrendered early on the morning of October 31 according to the Chronica. The last royal charter issued before the walls of Oreja is dated October 18. A charter issued by the king's sister, Sancha Raymondez, at Sahagun on October 27, 1139 is dated to the year and month in which Oreja was captured. Considering the time it would have taken for news of the capture to reach Sahagun, Oreja probably surrender closer to October 20. There is also a royal charter that was issued at Toledo and dated October 26, presumably only a day or so after the king's returning triumph. After the surrender, Alfonso's banners were raised from the highest tower, accompanied by the twin shouts of acclamation of those holding the banners, "Long live Alfonso, the Emperor of Leon and of Toledo." And the assembled clergy with hands raised, "We praise you, Lord, we acknowledge your glory," which included some, unnamed, bishops. The surrendering Muslims first went to Alfonso's camp, where they remained several days as honored guests and received back their hostages. They were then allowed to go with their families and their movable personal property under military escort, led by Rodrigo Gomez, to Calatrava. This act of general mercy outraged the local residents from around Toledo, who wanted them killed. One recent historian identifies the Count Rodrigo the Chronica relates as escorting the defeated with Rodrigo Fernandez instead of Rodrigo Gomez. Returning triumph. The Chronica provides a description of the triumph which Alfonso received upon his arrival in Toledo after the siege. It is not an historical description, but an extended allusion to passages in the book of Daniel, 3:7, and the Gospel according to Matthew, 21:9. When his coming was announced, all of the leaders of the Christians, Moors, and Jews and all the commoners of the city went out to meet him with tambourines, lutes, psalteries and many other musical instruments. In his own tongue each one of them praised and glorified God who had aided all of the enterprises of the emperor. They were saying, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and blessed are you and your wife and your children and the kingdom of your fathers, and blessed is your compassion and forbearance." Inside the city, Raimundo, the Archbishop of Toledo, led a long procession of clerics and monks into the plaza of the city and welcomed the emperor. They went to the church of Saint Mary, during which time the archbishop was singing, "Fear God, obey his commandments." Furo. Alfonso refortified the castle, leaving a garrison composed of knights and infantry, and supplied with several siege engines for defensive purposes. He also replenished the internal water supply and added food provisions. Alfonso also organized the resettlement of the town with a furo, collection of privileges, in November. The new settlers were required to remit to the king a fifth of any booty they might take at the enemy's expense. The settlers could not be traders nor any count or other power who possessed royal fiefs, but those who were in disgrace or had gained the king's anger could take refuge in Oreja. The town, like Ocana, was also granted the abduction privilege. According to this custom, a man who had abducted a woman could take refuge in the town, the king levying a fine of 500 sueldos on anybody who injured or killed him. This policy was designed to encourage settlement by providing a means for settlers to procure wives. Alfonso had first granted this privilege to Guadalajara in 1133, but in the case of Oreja it was severely restricted. The abductee could not be already married, related to the abductor, or abducted by force. She had to come voluntarily and of marriageable age. The law was designed to prevent families from repatriating eloped female relatives, and to prevent cuckolds from taking back their adulterous wives. The furo of Oreja, like that of Escalona, also protected new settlers' properties in their places of origin. They were exempted from service for these, and also extended royal protection. It was typically required of settlers in New Castile to stay in their new possessions for at least 1 year, and such was the case in Alfonso's furo for Oreja 38. Afterwards settlers often sold off their new land. Alfonso also exempted Oreja from having to pay the portaticum or portazgo, the usual toll on transporting goods along a certain road or through a certain territory, throughout his kingdoms except in the region of Toledo. Further, if any person in the kingdom wished to take legal action against an inhabitant of Oreja, he had to go to a place on the bank of the Tagus beneath the walls of the castle of Oreja and seek judgment there. This law, too, was not unusual for resettlements, although again persons from Toledo were excepted.